Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. We're going to do an analysis of the vice presidential debate between JD Vance and Tim Walz. Before we do so though, two quick disclaimers. One, I think that JD Vance won. I think it was pretty clear that he won. Not by that much. I think that Tim Walz still held his own, but the reasons for which we'll get into more in detail throughout this video. And then the second disclaimer being that no matter who you think won, no matter who I think won, this isn't going to have that much of an impact on the presidential election overall, on who wins on November 5th. The very, very small percent of the electorate who lives in a swing state, who is an independent voter, who hasn't made up their mind yet, isn't probably going to be swayed by the vice presidential election. So with all that said, let's get into the actual analysis. My first takeaway was that JD Vance was extremely articulate and did exactly what he needed to do. So let's watch the first clip on immigration.
And it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years,
also, Tim Walz, this is a face that he gave throughout the debate. It seemed very strange and off-putting, but never mind that.
Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Okay, so I think we saw from that he was extremely well prepared, gave out all the points. I think one major thing that he needed to do during this debate was show that he's not weird, right? Over the past few months that he's been the vice presidential pick, people like Tim Walz have been calling him weird, have said that he's trying too hard to connect to the American people, you know, the donut shop video, all of that stuff. But I think during this debate, he really showed the American people that he is normal. He's a very normal dude. He's a very articulate person, and he's able to carry out the role of vice president and is, you know, intelligent. He knows policy, and that really instilled, I think, a lot of trust in him. So then the next clip, let's just watch that also touches on civility that he portrayed throughout this entire debate.
Have to try and reduce the impact of climate change. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of two grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild.
Also, Tim Walz was taking notes this entire debate. It was kind of getting on my nerves how many notes he was taking, but never mind that. I think we got the point from JD Vance. I think that JD Vance really did what he needed to do in this debate. Not only did he show that he was a normal, functioning person, that he wasn't weird, but he also supported Trump in a lot of his responses. He really cast aside doubts on Kamala Harris and how she's radical and how she hasn't really done what she promises to do. She's running for a position that she kind of already has. She has the lower level position of it, but still she's in the administration. She could do a lot of the things that she's promising to do, so why hasn't she done that? That's something that ABC also points out, that he also proclaimed that Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world through deterrence, and really just promoted Trump and how stable a man he would be. So I think that he really did what he needed to do, JD Vance, and was a great vice president and supporting character with Donald Trump, and also secured some of his own future in the Republican Party. He's a very young man. He's like 40 or something. He's going to have a future beyond 2024. My next claim is that Tim Walz was unprepared. As his subheadline says, the Republican candidate was clearly better prepared, and that's a lesson for Democrats. I think through a lot of the debate, Tim Walz, was shaking off his nerves. He was very confused. He seemed uneasy about a lot of things, and they really should have taken better time to prepare Tim Walz. They really didn't. And so looking at this first clip, this was the first question that was asked of him, and you can really get off a vibe that's pretty upsetting, honestly.
Final voice in the Situation Room. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it, experienced it.
Okay, so he was just stumbling over himself maybe throughout this, through the rest of the debate. He definitely did find his footing, but he was not prepared, which was something I was extremely surprised by because the Harris campaign definitely prepared Kamala Harris. She was extremely prepared for that first debate, so I was surprised that he wasn't as prepared for this debate. Maybe they put more trust into Tim Walz or didn't have as much time, but either way, he's not prepared and he's obviously visibly nervous, and it's honestly off-putting. And then this China question, absolutely took him off his game. He was not expecting this question. I think he wasn't expecting a lot of questions. I don't know what he exactly expected out of a debate, but definitely wasn't prepared at all for this one.
You were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of.
Okay, that's all great, but it's not answering the question.
That service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Okay, oh my God.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance.
That was just the most awkward moment of the entire debate, in my opinion. He also said later on that he was friends with school shooters, obviously misspeaking there. But with this one, it's really shocking how he wasn't prepared for this. Also, there's so many discrepancies within his past that he really needs to understand, like, a way to tackle them, or a way to explain them at least. So this was one of the many places where he wasn't prepared, but the first clip I showed was at the beginning. This one's in the middle. But then we see at the end of the debate, he's much better prepared. So watching this one, he's talking about January 6th and democracy and all that. He's much better prepared. This is a question that he did well on. He also did well on abortion, but later on we see, and as the topics get more and more closer to home, or that he's more prepared for at least, he gives better responses.
I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement, but this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris?
And this was a moment that the media really picked up on, that he said, I'm focused on the future, that he didn't answer this question. And without this moment, I think that JD Vance would have really clearly won, but this really put the nail in the coffin for JD, like, having a monumental victory, and it showed a lot of people that, hey, they're still not willing to say that they lost the election, and that's a pretty concerning point for most people.
Censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation? Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the...
Okay, and this goes on and on. We could watch this until then. But it really shows that JD Vance, or Tim Walz, started off pretty weak. And then later on became more and more comfortable with the stage, with his opponent. And I think that if he had a bit more of debate practice, this debate could have gone really differently for him. But overall, he didn't have that much of a terrible stumble. Honestly, the China moment was the worst moment, and then throughout the rest of the debate, he was pretty much like this throughout most of it, and it wasn't too harmful for him. But one thing that I would like to point out is that this entire, we saw that JD Vance was extremely articulate, well prepared. Tim Walz the opposite of so in many respects, and so this really all comes down to one thing, that they haven't had as much media practice. Here, Axios rightly points out that JD Vance has an anytime, anywhere media strategy. At any point, he takes on the media. He has had 50 appearances, which we'll look at later, but this is his strategy. He's looking for as many ways to get in front of people's eyes with media that doesn't agree with him, with media that is friendly to him, like Fox. But overall, he has this come-at-me strategy, where he is not afraid of being in front of the camera, and that's given him enough practice where he's used to these adversarial questions coming from the media. And so at the debate, he wasn't concerned or surprised by these. They didn't take him for surprise, versus Tim Walz and Kamala Harris have a hide from the press strategy, right? Brock Summers, their most deliberate media thing. Otherwise, they're hiding from the media. They haven't had practice. They had fewer interviews and press conferences than any other major party's presidential pairings in modern United States history. They're trying to trot out Joe Biden's basement strategy, but it's really not working for them. Now, looking at this absolute breakdown, this absolutely surprised me. First of all, look at this. Appearances in TV and print media. Kamala Harris has had 3. JD Vance has had 59. First of all, this isn't even an equal comparison. JD Vance is the vice presidential nominee. He should have less than Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris should have much more, and this is absolutely surprising. If you poll a majority of Americans, they say that they really think it's important for candidates to be asked about their policies and beliefs and values and everything coming up to an election. And Kamala Harris is a 3. But most people don't see a problem with that. Most people don't know about these numbers. Looking at this further, we see that JD Vance has had 59, obviously. We see that Trump has had 14, still more than both Walz and Harris combined. Walz has had 4, Harris has had 3. This is absolutely surprising. And honestly, this shows the, extreme volatility in between how JD Vance performed versus how Tim Walz has performed, because JD Vance has had so much experience, and sure, they've had lives beside this election cycle, they've had media appearances before this, but the election cycle, when you are on a ticket, is the most aggressive sort of campaign and media tour that you'll ever go on in your life. So with JD Vance having 59 rounds of practice and Tim Walz only having 4, it's obvious that JD Vance would have performed better. Overall, JD Vance is known for being articulate and being smart and being intelligent, and not that Walz isn't known for those things, but JD Vance is really known for those things. Now, my third point is that this debate was extremely civil, the most far departure from anything we saw in the June debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, where they didn't even shake hands, and we see here they're really being civil. They're really shaking hands here. And we see here that even though they disagree, they're still being civil.
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me.
This is almost too kind here. It's like two friends hanging out. At the end of the debate, if we just go there, they're really actually talking to each other. At the end there, if this loads, right? They're actually discussing.
I don't think they're.
Okay, well, we'll get to that later. But if we look at this other clip as well, or no, this one, sorry.
How is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom bringing American manufacturing back issue. And I've got
look, they've got really good rapport here. They're being really substantive. That's something else that really surprised me from this debate, was that there are no personal attacks whatsoever. This was a very cordial debate, very substantive. They talked about a lot of policy that wasn't even brought up in the presidential debate. They talked about like national parks and land and all that stuff, which I thought was really interesting, honestly, and I would love to hear more about during these types of debates, but that unfortunately aren't discussed enough, because during the actual presidential debates, we have to talk about Kamala Harris's race and Donald Trump's crowd sizes, and it's not as effective. But these ads, I swear. Okay, let's just get through this ad so that we see this clip. Okay, right here. We see them just like actually discussing with each other. Actually having a good solid conversation. Then their wives come in. They leave afterwards, but they were actually shaking hands. They were actually seeming like they respected one another, which is like refreshing in American politics, because we usually don't have that. So overall, I think that if this presidential debate does anything, is that it sets back the precedent for civil debates. This is something we haven't really seen since 2012 and 2016, extremely hostile, 2020, extremely hostile, even the presidential elections this far, or presidential debates this far. In this election cycle, obviously, the June one, extremely hostile. Kamala Harris shook Trump's hand, but then they still exchanged personal attacks during the last debate, so I don't know how effective that was. But then this debate, really civil, really reminded me of 2012 with Mitt Romney and Obama. And so I'd love to see this being a continuing trend, and really Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, I really respect them for trying to set this precedent, at least. And then my last claim is that this debate really does not matter as much as people are making it out to matter. Now, looking at the actual poll, it seems like people weren't as on the same page as me with saying that J.D. Vance won. People were much more conflicted about that. Only 42% said that J.D. Vance won, 41% said Tim Walz won, and then 70% said a tie. Honestly, a tie, understandable as well. But I overall agree with the 42%, a plurality, not a majority of the people. This was not as clear and cut as the presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump was. Obviously, majority of people thought that Kamala Harris won that debate, but still, again, non-consequential from that end. But the tone, I vastly agree with the majority of Americans that they said this was generally positive. 88% of Americans can barely agree on anything, and so this tone setting is something they really hope will move on forward in American politics. And then reasonable, they both sound a reasonable majority of the time. Again, J.D. Vance did what he needed to do with flipping that weird spectacle on its head. And then this is, not really consequential, and the majority of the time, voters thought that Walz did better on pretty much all the issues except for the economy and immigration, and on the Middle East, this is only one question, 50-50, that makes sense. Abortion, healthcare, Tim Walz is going to win those. And then opinions of both, this is really interesting to me. So if we compare them with the opinions of J.D. Vance, right, this is Tim Walz, this is J.D., we look at the favorability ratings, both of them went up. J.D. Vance by 9, Tim Walz by 8, and then the unfavorability ratings for both of them went down. I really, really honestly like this, seeing that both of them seem to be more popular in the eyes of majority of Americans, or a lot of Americans, after this debate. And then that, again, not as consequential. Usually the person that explains their own views most of the times is the winner, but that didn't really correlate within the winning polls that we saw. And overall, again, this poll, or this debate overall, isn't going to influence many people. If we see this ABC article about, like, why VP debates don't matter all that much, typically less people watch the VP debates. I haven't seen the exact numbers of how many people watch this specific debate, but then most people aren't going to be deciding who's going to win based off this. Nobody in history has voted for a presidential candidate based on a VP debate. Both of these guys are doing enough so that their side thinks they're winning, and both of the sides said afterwards, sent out statements that they won the debate. And honestly, I think that they did enough, exactly what this person said, that they did do enough to proclaim that their side won. And they did do enough so that their candidate is successful in the future. And of course, Tim Walz wasn't as spontaneous, and he didn't have that, like, dad energy that everyone's talking about. He didn't really have that. But I do disagree with Van Jones here. That was like kitchen table versus Ivy League. I think that, honestly, Tim Walz could have done better, that he just wasn't as prepared. It has nothing to do with Ivy League or anything like that. And then VP debates don't matter. Again, agree with that. It was civil and substantive, but again, doesn't really matter. It's not that much of a big deal because, like we said at the top, this isn't going to influence anyone's ballot on November 5th, or at least it shouldn't really, I guess. So overall, this debate was a civil one. It was substantive. I really enjoyed watching it. It brought me closer to both candidates, I felt, and that's, I think, the takeaway that a lot of Americans had, is that they got to know better both of the candidates for what they had to say, not what the media had to say about them, and it was overall a very good experience. I hope continues on in this fashion throughout the next few election cycles and beyond, honestly. So thank you for watching this video, and let me know in the comments below what type of videos you want to see next.